Welcome to Conversations from the Alcove. My name is Caridad Svich. I'm a playwright and artistic director of the Alcove New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City, where we, among other things, commission artists, support them in their process of making work, and so forth. This series, if you have not been here before, is devoted to conversations about art, life, the craft of playwriting, and the world. Not necessarily in that order. I'm going to start with a brief audio description of myself and before I introduce our guest today. I am a fair-skinned person with, today my hair, every day it's different, brownish, goldish hair. I have it up, but I have bangs that are hitting my forehead. And I have brown eyes, and I have round glasses, tortoiseshell glasses that are pitched on the tip of my nose. I have red lipstick on, and I'm wearing, you may have seen this before in a prior episode, I'm wearing one of my favorite shirts, which is a polka dot shirt, black background, white polka dots. Behind me is a white background. You'll see a view of a window, which it's real, it's not virtual. And you might see the outline of a frame of a picture on the side, but maybe not. Depends on which angle you're looking at this from. My guest today is Elaine Avila, who is a Canadian-American playwright, screenwriter, educator, dramaturg, so many things at once, which is all great. As a playwright, her works have been produced all over the world, yay, in places like Panama, New York City, Lisbon, the Azores, yes, Los Angeles, Santa Cruz, London, Toronto, Seattle, Vancouver, Victoria, so many things. Her works have been noted for frequently incorporating music, politics, and humor. And I slight divulge this here that under my other umbrella, as founder of NoPassport Press, I have published her work, her plays. So I'm a fan on another level as well as a publisher. Welcome, Elaine, and thanks for making time today.
Thank you. This is just wonderful to have this conversation with you and to see you. And should I audio describe myself as well?
Yes,
or
please.
Like,
Yes, that would be lovely.
So I have short reddish brownish hair. I've got purple glasses and some lipstick, but it's less red because I should be wearing red in solidarity because this is now a protest here south of the border. And I have I have a necklace that reminds me of my Azorean background. It looks like a whale. I have some pictures from when I was on my Fulbright working on a play about women in my ancestry who wore giant capes, kind of like the burqa, but shaped like a whale, absolutely huge capes. So I have some pictures of those behind me because I've made a play about that. So those are
super cool.
My shot. Yeah.
That's super cool. Welcome. So for those of you who know the series, you know I always start with the same question, which is, how is the climate crisis affecting your art practice?
Well, Caridad and I, along with Chantal Bilodeau, founded the Climate Change Theater Action, which now reaches 45,000 worldwide. And we worked on that together in 2015, I think?
2015,
so,
yeah.
Yeah. So it's been affecting our process for some time. But personally, there's fires in the West, as people know. So sometimes my apartment is uninhabitable. So last summer, there's lots of construction and there's lots of fire. So I ended up leaving a lot, like going camping or cat sitting or just to be somewhere where I could work on I'm publishing my new play, which is about how a hummingbird stopped a pipeline here. So I ended up being personally affected quite a bit. I also took the train to work with Kate Weiss, who's a director I've worked with quite a bit that also has directed Caridad's plays and loves them. And I took the train and we went through Jasper, which is a place my grandparents had their honeymoon. And so I tried to go to places where they went. And then not long after, the whole town was burned to the ground. So similarly, yeah. So Lytton is another town that was burned to the ground in BC. Yeah, we've been personally affected. There's a theater here, Savage Theater, founded by Kevin Loring, who's from the Lytton area. And so they collected things to bring to the survivors of the fire. but their entire town was decimated. Yeah, there's a lot of personal effect. And then you also have a very close connections to Southern California. So
Yes, I do.
yeah, so there's a lot of
Yeah.
mourning, grief, really. I mean,
there is. Yeah, I mean, obviously the climate crisis has been with us for a while, and I think that theater has been slow to catch up, I think, in terms of thinking about it in terms of actually material production. There's so much waste in our industry. I mean, the most visible example of that is sets being destroyed and dismantled and thrown away, and so forth. But there are other ways that there's wastefulness, and I think that. But also in terms of subject matter, right? And I find it a little bit hard to watch plays. I mean, for a variety of reasons, but watch plays that are set ostensibly in realism that aren't kind of acknowledging the reality. And this is a massive disconnect. And as we know, like since the especially
I guess talking about fires made me sneeze.
I know, no worries. Since the 1970s, we know for a fact, it's been documented, that many corporations have decided to kind of like, they knew and then they decided we don't know, right? Like there was a lot of that going on. So I think that, we're just in a very, I think it's catching up with us and now we're in it. I think that in a sense it's always been there. Since the Industrial Revolution, and I think now we're deeply embedded. And I just think in terms of the kinds of work that we make, what little time we have left to make theater in the world, this should be forefronted. And I don't mean in terms of prescriptive, but more like it should be the baseline from which we work. This is sort of my motto. Maybe other people will disagree with me, but that's okay. I wanted to think about how you're approaching subject matter of your work or form in relationship to this.
Well, that's very interesting. So I've been commissioned twice, once to write a play for the Mellon Foundation and Pomona College. So I ended up writing about how a small town became the center of international controversy because they were one of the first municipalities in North America to vote yes or no on a pipeline. And the half of the town is Azorean Portuguese, which is my heritage. So I was really able to go up there. It's very close to Alaska, and speak with residents. And so they ended up voting no to the pipeline, even though they were considered the fastest declining town in Canada. And everyone said they're not going to vote against their own interests. So that was a really powerful story to me. And then Hummingbird was a recent commission where I found out that the pipeline here was stopped for 4 months because of a hummingbird, because you're not allowed to build pipelines if there's a nest at the time. And then I started to wonder, well, where did this law come from about the birds? And it turned out that it was 2 women in Boston that couldn't vote that ended up getting it on the books because they didn't think it was right that women were wearing dead birds on their clothes. And so they helped found the Audubon Society. So it was really interesting to me that that had been invisibilized. Like I didn't know that women had done this. But yeah, that's a law that's stopping pipelines internationally. So basically those plays, if I look back on them, were really about little pockets of resistance that were successful for a time. So there's something empowering about it, but there's also something that I've been reflecting on is very sad because they ended, ultimately other industrial projects are going through that town, Kitimat in northern British Columbia, and ultimately they ended up fining the pipeline such a small amount of money that it's not really a deterrent to them to stop construction because of bird nesting. So they keep, it feels like everyone keeps working around these pockets of resistance so they collapse. But so that's part of why I'm interested in taking a new approach with this play, because I It's about seaweed and about one of the women who was the foremost researchers of seaweed around the turn of the century, and I'd never heard of her either. So I don't really think this is a collapsing pocket of resistance. I think seaweed could be a huge help to us in the climate crisis. And so every time I'm distressed about today's political environment, I research seaweed and I get so astounded. Like, for example, bull kelp forests are a huge carbon sink. So some people are planting more and more of them. And, they're also huge. Seaweed is a great source of food all around the world, and we're running out of areas to grow food. So anyways, everything that I find out about seaweed makes me ecstatic.
It gives you hope. It gives you the seaweed hope. I think there might be a book in this. It's so cool. You mentioned 3 different projects, and I just wanted to lift up that a lot of your work centers stories where women are protagonists, or communities of women are protagonists. And so obviously some of this is it's all intentional, but I wonder sometimes if that's something that you discovered along the way, or was that always something that you were after as a writer?
It was why I became a writer, because I was an actor and a director, and I just said, where are all the stories? Where are all the stories about women? And so I think Suzan-Lori Parks, who was my mentor, calls it the great hole of history. So I was naive about how and why these stories weren't happening. But I just, went forward and said, we've got to have more stories centering women, thinking that it would be a simpler project to have equity in the theater than it really was. I was in my 20s. But it's very conscious. And then I started wondering, where were all the stories from my heritage? Why had that been erased? What about workers? What about class? So I'm very motivated by whatever is missing.
Yes. The holes that are not holes. They've been made into holes, right? So this is the erasure of history by power, as we're seeing in a lot of different places around the world, including the U.S. And so to that end, I wonder about. So I think that one of the difficulties maybe about writing from this remit, shall we say, is that. How can I put this? I'll wear my devil's advocate hat for a second, which is to say, there might be some people that say, oh, you're going to be lecturing to me in the theater? Why are you lecturing to me? I don't go to the theater to be lectured to. Okay, so that's my devil's advocate voice. Not a very fun voice. Anyway, so Elaine, I wonder how you negotiate this notion of like bringing us into a theatrical experience, but also knowing that potentially there might be audience members who'd be like, why is that being told? Why is that, you know what I mean? And so I guess does that ever occur to you when you're making something, or when you're in the process of revising?
Oh, I guess I just have this very strong theatrical side, like also ever since I was a kid, and I have the same birthday as P.T. Barnum. So I always have this, like, there's the big show, and in fact, I got into theater because of the circus. Like, a clown passed me a feather, and it was so magical to me that I was transfixed. I didn't understand how there could be 2 realities at once. I was only like 6 years old. So to me, theater's just so amazing and so transformative and so fun. And I also, have lots of humor in my work. So I don't know, Caridad, like when I end up working on a story, people are often like, what? I never knew that happened. So I get this wonderful response from people, this empowerment. So there's this side of things, stories that people haven't heard, and I feel like they can be just as entertaining as not.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I'm on what?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say absolutely, and sort of getting people through humor, getting people through wonder, through things that look beautiful is one way, right? To winning an audience. There are tactics that we use as writers, right? To kind of draw people in. I wanted to also look at, obviously we're in I'm going to use a very mild word, we're in uncertain times. Uncertain. They're like very uncertain. And so I think that this is a very, it feels like an inordinately more difficult time to be an artist for a lot of reasons. Fiscally, there's less and less funding. I don't know about Canada, but in the US, less and less funding. But also, I think that this seed of, not seed, but this kind of reality of uncertainty, of doubt, of like people living in multiple realities, conspiracy theory, like there's, and that it's, I think as an artist, it's like you have to wade through a lot more stuff in a way to get at the core of what you need to do. Perhaps this is my impression of things at the moment, talking to fellow artists. And so I'm just wondering how you're keeping your center. How are you living in the uncertainties that we are all experiencing globally, and how that's affecting your practice, but also, what suggestions or advice you may have for people listening that are going through this?
Well, those are, yes, we're in very difficult times. I suppose that I have been inspired by Larissa Fasthorse, the wonderful playwright, who mentioned that the floorboards of the American theater are rotten. And that's true in Canada as well. It's on stolen land, often built by enslaved peoples. And to me, that's a very powerful metaphor. And I think what gives me a lot of strength is my solidarity with Indigenous artists. And I was thinking about how to talk about that today, because I've been so fortunate to often collaborate with artists that are connected to traditions that are 10,000, 15,000 years old. And they have very deep practices in terms of sustainability, So, and I was trying to think like, okay, in New York, what is something people will have heard of? And I thought about Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. And there's quite a lot of principles in there. It's a New York Times bestseller that I am greatly inspired by, like the idea of reciprocity with the natural world. I was taught by an Okanagan knowledge keeper 2 summers ago, and she taught us how to care for a tree that was giving us fruit. So you would take the fruit, but you would give the plant water, or if you didn't have water, you'd sing the plant a song, or take a hair from your head and give it to the plant. And I thought, we're in at least I was brought up in the United States in a culture, and same with Canada, where we're used to thinking like, how can we make money from this? When we cut down these trees, then we get the maximum amount of cherries from this tree and take and take and take and take. And some cultures that have been here much longer than ours have practices that are about how can we take care of the plant? How can we take only what we need and give back the rest? And many of those things are in Robin Wall Kimmerer's book. So I get great solace from that. As far as like the precarity and how we're going to survive, I think that is a very difficult, very real, very scary. I mean, especially because the LA fires have just happened. But Bill McKibben, who's been writing about the climate crisis for a long time in nonfiction, he says the important thing is community and bringing and bringing people together. So I guess theater does that. But you've been a very lithe, agile theater maker in all kinds of contexts for a very long time. So I feel very grateful that Seaweed and Josephine Tilden has brought me together with you and what you're doing at the Lortel. So people were asking Bill McKibben, where do we move in the climate crisis? What's an area of the planet that would be safe? And he's like, nowhere, but
nowhere.
Like your community, So I guess that's where I draw strength. But I do have a tendency to focus on the positive, and so I'm learning to spend a little bit more time in the morning, and how painful it is.
Yeah, I hear you. I think that I think to the question of fiscal support for artists, and gathering, you mentioned gathering is important. Yes, I think that the one of the barriers right now, at least for IRL gatherings, is that a lot of theater is becoming more and more unaffordable. Ticket prices, $400, $500, $600, at a certain point, who is it for? And it does feel like it's pricing itself out of its audience to some extent. And I know that there are costs involved in what we do, and those costs have grown more so every year. But it feels, it sort of limits who can gather. And I think that perhaps, this notion of exclusivity around theater can alienate people, is what I wanted to say. People will feel like, well, it's not for me. Like, I can't afford that. Like, who's that for? You know what I mean? So I think that there's this weird loop that I think theater is in, of like, we'll just charge whatever and people will come. And it's like, no, a lot of people feel like that's not for me, and therefore it may never be for me, right? So you're closing a door on a lot of audiences and who will go elsewhere, And I think that, sometimes the comparison is made, which I don't think is an accurate one, but I will state it here, which is, say, some people, you'll talk to producers, et cetera, and they will say, well, we're competing with Netflix. And it's like, we're actually not. We're actually not, because it's a completely different medium. There are some storytelling elements that might be similar in terms of narrative, right? If people that are working in narrative, especially, but in narrative storytelling. But I think that the what of what we do is very different. Also, to counter that, I would say, another devil's advocate moment is to say that, shows like Waitress filming themselves and broadcasting themselves online makes people want to see Waitress in person, right? Like, Hamilton broadcasting itself online didn't stop people from wanting to see Hamilton, et cetera. So this notion that theater is exclusive, that actually you can invite people in through the means that Netflix uses, right? And that's just one of many streamers, right? But through the means of broadcasting, through the means of streaming, you can attract a new audience, right? Theater is often talking about, where's a new audience? And I'm like, well, if you tell them what we do, it would be awesome. Instead of hiding what we do from people, people might be interested in what we do, right? And so I just think about, like, there are different kinds of points of access that I think are necessary for the medium to thrive at a time when I think that, audiences feel priced out, right? If I can see Waitress for, like, a subscription of like $15 a month, on a website platform, or I can see the Red Shoes Ballet, or I can see, right? That allows me as an audience, as I'm speaking as I were an audience member, like, allows me access to work that I wouldn't see otherwise, right? That I couldn't afford, right? So I think that's super important, right? Like, I think that it's, it means that you can dream bigger, in a sense, right? That somebody can say, oh, me, I'm interested in art, but I don't know where I can see this. And, oh, there it is. Oh, that looks really cool. I want to do that, right? Like, I think it also makes people want to make the work as future artists. And so, my little soapbox for the day, but it's something I really believe in. But to that end, I guess, this notion of, like, how to share work. So you've worked a lot in different contexts globally. And I wonder what that process has been like for you. Maybe you can bring up 2 or 3 different examples of, like, being in community with work, or doing work across distances, or through telematic presences. If that's something you want to speak to.
Well, I feel like a lot of theater artists did that pivot online, as we called it, right? And a lot of exciting things were happening. And I feel like you're one of the few people that recognize that and are keeping that alive. a lot of people were like, no, I can't do it anymore. I'm done with Zoom, like that's it. But there was a lot of really wonderful potential. Like we could connect to each other. We could connect to work. We could make work, because this is a frame, just like a stage is a frame. And like you said, ticket prices were more affordable. But I'm just going to loop back to something that you were just talking about, the $400, $500 ticket price. And I feel that really goes back to that whole floorboards are rotten, theaters for the elite. There's a whole stream of theater that's been like that for so long. My cousins in Portugal, when I went and did a little play there, it was at a very prestigious theater, and it was like a staged reading. And they had to go there the night before because they said we were too poor for theater. We didn't know where it was. We had to find it. So they had to find where it was the night before, and they're like in their 80s now. But I was just so moved by that. They were like, at last, someone from our ancestral village is an artist. So I guess many of us were on that trajectory where we were excluded from art. And then we, through immigration, through education, we were able to have access to it. But it still has that deep thread. As you know, you and I founded the Climate Change Theater Action because theaters tended to be funded by gas and oil. So people couldn't make art about the climate crisis. And I think that's still true. So that's very, very painful. But I'm going to jump into another aspect of your question, which inspired me and what you're saying. My students recently, I asked my advanced playwriting students to create a project for community, and whoever they saw community, whatever they were excited about. And normally I have a sort of Vegas agreement, what happens in class stays in class, but I was just so excited by what they were doing. I said, can I talk to other people about this? And they said, okay, but they were like looking at like, how can people with chronic illness or long COVID access the theater? What can we do? Because people can't all just sit in chairs all the time. What can we do? And I think that things they thought came up with were beautiful. Another student was creating a piece about where artists would create a mourning for projects that had died. So beautiful projects that you'd worked on, but somehow they died. And I thought that was a beautiful life for projects that we've all worked on that we don't know what happened to, or, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. And then I thought it could relate to a lot of things, like people that have acquired disability, like, it's just a beautiful, beautiful. And then he had there was another project that also inspired me, because podcasters like the McElroy brothers, I found out about this through my son, it's huge. Like I went to the last PodCon conference in Seattle, and they're a wild, live, innovative group of people where they are doing serial drama every week and figuring out like, oh, that didn't work, let's do this next. For $100 microphone, they're doing this. But then I saw they packed one of Vancouver's theaters, all these McElroy PodCon people, and they're all 30 and younger. And I was like, oh, this is where all this theater audience is that we've been looking for. So one of my students had the idea of doing live improvised D&D campaigns at theaters, and it was like, great. And it brings out the queer community, and, actors would improvise aspects of the story. It's like, there's a kind of huge audiences and groups and ideas out there, but we're not really, you always have ideas that are open to this. Like, I love that you say, what if we had a theater season where you could program one slot at the last minute?
Yeah.
That's such a profound, but not difficult, I guess I'll say, idea. Because we often end up programming things that people have wanted to do since 1980 or something. Theater doesn't have this freshness that it needs. I think there is an audience out there. I just don't think we're tapping into it. So as for my own experiences with working around the world, sometimes I guess I feel like I've heard that calling your plays children is a trap. So women shouldn't necessarily do it, but because they aren't children. But I do like that metaphor, because I feel like sometimes my plays, maybe you feel this too, go out and do things. And I'm like, sometimes they take me and sometimes they're off somewhere, and I'm like, what? So I wrote a play about eagles and how I talked to some eagle scientists, and it turned out that eagles that used to be in the eagle capital of the world, quite near me, by a river, there used to be 30,000 eagles would come every year, maybe even more. But now they go to a dump near here because that's where the food is. So I wrote a play about, from the perspective of eagles, like, are humans going to get this together or not in terms of the climate crisis? And bizarrely, that play was performed over 40 times, including in a command performance for Al Gore. And it really spoke to people because we have really taken care of eagles in the past because we banned DDT. But I could see how eagles would be mixed on whether or not we were going to get it together, for sure. But I feel like that's a play that went off and did all these things like a child or something. And I'm like, what? You did all that? That's great. Oh, so sometimes I'm invited to come with the play, and sometimes it goes off by itself. So, but I'm always very, very moved. Like I'm very moved that some of my plays were done on my ancestral lands, or, you know, how we do research to learn what a community is going through. And sometimes it feels a little bit abstract because we're working on it in our apartments, which are featured in this shot. So it's amazing to me that these projects, which seem not to be so relevant, end up really, really affecting people. So yeah. So if they are children, sometimes I get to go, sometimes I don't, sometimes I hear back from them, sometimes they're just having a fabulous life without me.
Yeah, which is what plays do, right? You know, they just go on. If you're lucky, you know, some plays have their lives, and you know, it's hard to predict too, right? Like you think, oh, this one will surely, and then sometimes you'll be like, that one, oh, okay, like who knew that that's the one that people would be like interested in, you know, like it's so mysterious, and of course, a lot of it has to do with, you know, what's happening in the world, et cetera. But sometimes it literally is mysterious. Like, why that one and not that one, and you know, all of that stuff. I think to that end, I wanted to touch on the notion of like writing to the moment or writing alongside the moment, or, you know, those things that as writers, I think that, you know, it's hard, right? Like, I think that we are recorders of our times, right? Like, that's what we do. But I think there's sometimes pressure to speak directly to the moment, and of course in theater, if you're lucky, if a play gets on at all, it's like 5 years or 7 years or 10 years later after you wrote it. So it's never to the moment. So you're always kind of writing past the moment that you're in, but you're in it already. Which I think a lot of people don't understand that that's what happens, right? Like in terms of theater programming. And to that end, I just wanted to, like, slight sidebar to say that I often talk to theater companies, and they're telling me, even now, they're telling me, I've got the next 5 years planned. And I'm like, you know what's going to happen in the world in the next 5 years? Really? Like, how can you plan a season without 5 years of seasons without knowing what's going to happen in the world? Like that, either you have a crystal ball, which if you have, I want to know what's happening, or what are you doing? Like, literally, what are you doing? So some plays arrive. You know, it's interesting. I won't mention this play, but there was a play that got premiered last year or something, and it was fine. It was a good play, whatever. But it actually felt like it had missed its time, right? Like, it was clearly like, oh, this clearly was like written blah blah blah, but now we're not there anymore. So now I don't know how to. Well, I'm looking at like a history play, but it doesn't feel right, and you know, and so I think we're always in this bizarre predicament, I think, as writers, right? Like, of how to be clear-eyed about the world and recording it, but also knowing that we're in an industry that, for the most part, unless you're super fast or doing rapid response theater, is going to have much lag time. How do you deal with this? What do you do? When? I want to know.
Well, strangely, I've had some remounts lately. So, in fact, my university that I now work at, or college that I work at, they programmed my first play. Yeah. So that was very strange. And then they also progressed Jane Austen action figure last year. So the last 2 years they've been doing plays that I haven't. I wrote 20, 30 years ago, 10 years ago. So it's sort of been it's a great gift, but it's a strange time warp for me. So it's made me realize that perhaps some of the plays that I'm writing people aren't ready for yet. So I had kind of the opposite response. Like I'm thinking, okay, Kitimat, for example, that was produced in Los Angeles. It has readings here that are packed. People come, they want to have the conversation, but theaters haven't programmed it here, and it's written for and from here. But it was done in Lisbon, so I think it's strange that people aren't doing it here, but maybe they're not quite ready yet for the conversation. So that's sort of what those plays taught me. But Jane Austen action figure really interested me quite a bit, because I think the opening night was the night that Trump won the election. So it was about women and sexuality and things that women hide. It became clear to me what it was about as I watched it again. Things that women hide or are forced to hide, the reality of their lives. And so the audience response that night was so raucous and joyous and full of humor and rebellion. So I thought, sometimes plays meet moments in ways you don't expect.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm having sort of the opposite effect. Like I'm thinking, if I write something that's relevant now, sometimes people aren't really ready to hear it until a little bit later. So
yeah,
one of my plays I thought was about a woman that escaped from her convent and dressed as a man. It's a true story from the 17th century. Of course, now that story we understand as a story about a trans man. So I don't know. Yeah, I think I always feel a little bit out of time, because we're writing in the time of a play. But then I'm not living in New York. And I think in New York is a very powerful place. I have lived in New York. I love New York. But it's also has a huge impact. Morgan Jeunesse talked about this. It's like the trains. Theater comes from New York and then disseminates across North America. It's a very powerful thing. But I have had to realize that I'm kind of a playwright from the West. I've lived in the West most of my life. And so I end up doing things that are inspired by the West and local communities. And so sometimes they come into New York, but so I'm off a lot of the concerns that people experience as real issues in New York. I'm kind of outside of that. Brian Herrera came to visit me, and he was like, oh, you feel the influence of indigenous writing here. You feel the Pacific Rim. You feel all these other influences here. It's very unusual. And I'm like, yeah, it is. I guess it really impacts you. So I end up looking at it a little bit differently, but maybe not practically.
Oh, well, who knows? I mean, the work that we do, it's just for the angels, I wanted to.
Oh, sorry. Did you feel that living in San Diego? Like, what was that like? Because you went to graduate school.
In San Diego, yeah, I went to grad school at UCSD, for those who don't know. And I'd never been out west before, so that was like a whole thing. And then I know that my writing changed when I was there. Like I suddenly was thinking about. I was literally thinking about, I know this sounds obvious, but I was thinking about landscape and like terrain and like, what are people walking on? Like, what does that feel? Because I think I grew up in the Northeast mainly, and I think, it was all like, concrete and, you're running around. And so suddenly to have space, it was also about like having space, or at least the illusion of space, being able to like really see the sky and, and hearing, the stars at night, all that stuff. That I know sounds very like, New Agey or whatever, but it was like, but it changed.
No, it doesn't. I can feel the sky in your work. I can feel the stars in the ocean in the space. It's still in your work now. And it's important.
It's important. And I think that it changed the way I thought about things. And, occasionally I will write things where that presence isn't primary. But I think it's always in there sneaking away, like it's somehow there. And I think it has to do a lot with, it's also thinking about like verticality and the horizontal, in theater, like, and that I've been sort of this is a slight sidebar, but I've been very interested in vertical planes of text on the last couple of, maybe the last 3 years or so, just kind of, I think because my work has been so horizontal in the past. And so I was just like, I'd want to play with text that moves up, that feels like it's moving up and upwards, but also down into the underworld, upwards and down into the underworld. And literally on the page, I want it to look like a column or something vertical. Because, and maybe this is a reaction to reading a lot of plays that are horizontal and then going, you know what, well, wait a minute, we can't forget this other part of theater that is interesting, right? That is sort of like, where it's just kind of, there's like, I'm always thinking about the ancient Greeks. I know I'm going to mention them. Oh, here I go again, mention the ancient Greeks. But anyway, I have to. Anyway, so, but where that feeling of like, where you just feel the underworld so strongly in those plays, and you also feel like the desire for the heavens, and that desire is so central, but it feels like not a straight line, but a kind of like thread that's pulling straight through. And I think I want text to do that in plays. I want text that kind of goes upwards, and because sometimes I think the horizontal can make you forget that. So that's something that I've been kind of exploring in the last couple of plays. I know it's very geeky. This is all geeky stuff, folks, for those who are listening.
Geeky is now cool. I've been learning this from my students. Geeky is like it's cool. It's much more cool to be a nerd than it was when we were younger.
I know, when we were kids, like geeky.
I love it. What? I love it. Yeah. And you're actually making me think about Seaweed again, the play, because I've been looking into some of the indigenous stories from that area. And it's very interesting because they were talking about that same plane, like above, and below, and the underworld and the sky and the earth. But they were also talking about the horizon because the people in that area lived right on the edge of the sea with all these giant trees. So they saw the horizon as where strangers would enter from, which I just thought was so fabulous to be thinking in all those directions. So I agree that if you're only on this horizontal plane, you're not tapping into the depth of your history. And it's great to mention the Greeks. There's another play I'm working on about Hypatia, who was Alexandrian mathematician and scientist. And so because there's a all-female orchestra here that wants me to write a play about her. So it's been so interesting connecting with the Greeks again, and again, the things that are missing from the Greeks. And why don't we talk about Alexandria more? I don't know, but so I love that. I think we've got to, it's almost like being a tree, the depth, that going deep in order to grow into the new directions. I think there's a lot that can be learned from nature around us, so. Yeah. And in Spanish and Portuguese, to imagine is another way of knowing, right? So
exactly. I wanted to. We're almost at time, but I wanted to ask this question about dreaming because I like that question, and it's like, what dreams do you have for theater, for the field, for what dreams do you have?
Well, it's interesting because we've been talking about so many things. So I've been thinking about how the New Play Festival in Canada was the Enbridge Festival of New Plays, which is, Enbridge is an oil company. So it doesn't exist anymore. But when I was speaking about how theater is so often funded by gas and oil companies, there was a group of employees in an audience. I was speaking about this at Canada's biggest theater. I was asked to be on a panel, and some of the people in the audience actually work for the telephone company here, and they were like, "What? We want to fund a play for climate. We hate this. We want." So I guess our conversation has led me to new dreams, which is like, that idea of bringing people into community, but also being in community with funders that don't like this either. We've kind of we're a little bit stuck, it feels like, and so I love that was the response. Like, we want to do something. We want to fund a play that's in response to climate in our current moment. And well, you're doing that as well.
It's a goal. It's an ongoing goal, and with all the challenges that we're facing right now. But I also think that the goal will not stop, because the planet is on fire. That's not going to stop unless we do something. And I think that window is getting shorter and shorter every year. If you're following the science at all, that we've passed the 1.5 tipping point, and we're in like very unstable, dangerous territory right now. And there's this not fear mongering, but I'm quoting a scientist to say that 2029, 2030 is looked at as like where the next huge ecological collapse is going to occur if we keep on in this accelerationist course, which at the moment feels like a lot of governments are doing. I just saw, sadly, this made me very sad. New Zealand stated when this records, it won't be yesterday, but it was yesterday at this recording, which is to say that New Zealand stated that they were pulling back. They were pulling back on thinking about climate for a while, and I was like, no, this is not the time to be pulling back. And I'm starting to see that, like, in different, part of my brain, I follow the news, the power brokers, sort of like the fiscal news, the people that have all the money, and I'm reading to sort of see, and of course this was spun as a positive. So just FYI, the article was like, this is great. This is so great. We don't have to be thinking about the climate, and I was like, oh, if people are thinking this, they're in trouble, right? Like, so I think this kind of like short-term profit mentality, which is part of the accelerationist mentality, is also true, I think, in our industry. We're part of capitalism too, right? So I think that this is, part of one of the problems in our industry, and that it's wedded itself kind of entirely into that thinking, and for a lot of reasons, funding reasons and many things, but also it's a thinking that we can step out of if we desire. It's just going to take a lot of work, just like it takes a lot of work to remake society and make it better. So that's my little dream. I'll say this again. This is like my one big dream, one big statement, and I don't think it's going to happen, but I will say it anyways. I still think that all the theaters in North America, all of North America should like sign a pledge to go green and mean it, and like really do it and sign it, like all of them, commercial, non-commercial, blah, 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 like all of them say, we will go green. I think if even that would change so much. And it's possible.
Well, there is a pledge that I signed, which is a no-fly climate scientist website where climate scientists, academics, general public make a pledge to fly less or not fly. And I wrote it down so that, because I thought I won't remember, but it was, it's noflyclimatesci.org. And it has there's a pledge right there. So it's so difficult in our field because success is often international success. And there's these wonderful things that people have been starting to do, like instead of flying to Edinburgh to do their solo show, they're rehearsing it with an actor there, through Zoom. So, but we're not really celebrating those things. And I guess it's so difficult because all of the change has to happen on every level, the personal level, the hugely political level.
Yeah.
But lately I've been quite inspired because I was talking to a colleague about all the dystopian movies and TV shows my students watch. And there's so many, right? Like they're nostalgic about ones they watched when they were 10, where the whole earth is destroyed, and it's only robots, and I was like, why are we so into, these dystopian stories? And stories are so powerful. And my friend said, well, that's very North American. In Latin America, we're thinking about the future, and there's so many governments that are resisting and dreaming about what could be. So I've been paying more attention to the global South and since the election, not just Latin America and Central America, but all the global South and resistance movements, because they're dreaming about the future. because it's quite amazing in wealthy countries that we come from that we so quickly say it's all going to be terrible. I agree with you about the science and everything you're saying, and I'm very, very fearful and distressed about it. But a lot of people also tell themselves the stories that people can't change, that, but that we just went through the pandemic. We changed a lot.
Right.
We changed all our behaviors. The planes were not flying,
Right.
So it's, I guess my dream is for us to all dream more about the future.
I love that. What a great place to end on. Yay. So thank you so much, Elaine, for being our guest today. And for those of you watching or listening, there are more episodes of Conversations from the Alcove, back episodes, more episodes to come. So if this is your first time with us, there's more wonderful conversations that you can listen to and hopefully be inspired by. If you have been here before, you know that what I do is say so long to you all out there in the audience, but then stay online after I hit end recording to say another so long to our guests. So for now, so long to you out there. See you next time in Conversations from the Alcove.